Happy holidays, everyone. Welcome back to the Moonlight Lore podcast. As always, I'm your jolly host, Jordan Hopkins, and I am so very thankful for all of you joining me for this very special holiday episode. I hope you all had an exceptional year and are looking forward to new beginnings come New Year's. And speaking of new things, unlike last year where we covered the singular case of the mysterious disappearance of the Sutter children on Christmas Eve back in 1945, this year we'll be doing something just a little different. There's an old tradition of sharing ghost stories during Christmas time. Now, it's not normally done now, we've sort of moved past this practice as a society years ago. But like the practice of trimming the Christmas tree, hanging of mistletoes, and even the Yule logs, telling ghost stories during the holiday is linked back to Yule, the celebration of the winter solstice. It's the day of the year when it's darkest for the longest period of time, and because of that, it was widely believed that on such long, cold nights, the dead are said to rise as spirits and ghosts who come to interact with the living. So naturally, because of this belief, the tradition of telling ghost stories became quite common, though, like I said, has since fallen out of popular practice. However, in this year's holiday special, I thought it might be fun to go back to this old tradition and delve into a few separate Christmas ghost stories that may or may not hold some truth behind them. For the most part, we won't be doing a deep dive into any of these. I will simply share the story and move on, leaving you all to ponder whether or not these horrifying Christmas tales are more than they seem. So without further ado, settle on in under a warm, comfy blanket with a cup of hot cocoa, dim the lights, and let's begin the show. Once upon a time, long ago, there was a lonely highwayman who went only by the name of Gilbert. Now, he was the sort of man who we could have expected to have had a bit of a troubled past to wind up living the life he led. Typically, highwaymen of this era operated in groups of 4 or more to better their chances at a successful robbery. But poor old Gilbert found himself running his schemes all alone in the English countryside, just beyond the outskirts of a small village known as Marton, nestled comfortably 50 kilometers southeast from London. The end of the 18th century was fast approaching, and during this time it was difficult to make a living for many, which eventually would lead those people towards the life of crime. This was the fate of Gilbert, a man out of luck. Life had taken away any hope that he could be a respectable man, and so he embraced the life of a criminal. Unfortunately for many, this also meant that they would play victims to the man's spree of transgressions. Very little was off limits to him. Murder was the most heinous of misdeeds he would commit, but found that it was too risky to outright do and often would not pay out as much as he wanted. So he resigned himself to robbing people of their wealth. He didn't necessarily have to kill anyone. Oftentimes the threat of him brandishing a knife was enough to encourage those traveling the empty country roads to give up their belongings willingly, which would lead to a profitable day of work for Gilbert without having to do much actual work. He would simply just have to hide in the trees or bushes along the dirt paths and see how long his patience would last as he waited for his next unsuspecting victim to come traveling down his chosen road. Perhaps it was greed, or maybe the man was just that unlikable, but he operated alone. It worked for him. It allowed him to never have to split the loot after a job, and he could make all the executive decisions in terms of who he was going to rob and how he was going to go about doing it. For quite some time, this worked for him. He managed to avoid the authorities well enough and only ever had to resort to murder on rare occasions when his victims seemed to put up a bit of a fight. Again, he didn't necessarily like killing people, but it occasionally came with the job, so he accepted it. Eventually one night, the night before Christmas, Gilbert found himself waiting in the shadows for new prey. This time of year was quite profitable for the man as many were traveling to and from town to visit relatives, oftentimes carrying valuables as gifts meant for their families or friends. It was a fruitful but immoral strategy. However, a horse-drawn carriage was on its way down the road, and any reservations that might have been present in his mind suddenly dissipated. A carriage meant someone wealthy, and it was a chance to make bank. Gilbert waited in the bushes until it was nearly right on top of him. He sprung from his hiding place, startling the horses. The man controlling them struggled to calm them with the reins, and the commotion drew the attention of a young girl and her father inside. As the first to exit to figure out what was wrong, the girl cautiously stepped out of the box carriage, but was flung backwards into the hard dirt as the horses finally grew too timid with the stranger approaching with a sharpened blade drawn. The young girl's father was still inside the coach as it bolted from the scene, their driver at the front struggling to control the beasts. The girl was left alone with Gilbert at the side of the road. As the two men fought against the might of the horses, they managed to calm them enough to turn them around and bring themselves back to the scene where the daughter was left, but only Gilbert was there. Nobody knows what had truly transpired that evening, but it's believed the young girl had managed to get the upper hand on Gilbert, stabbing him with his own knife as she tried to run away. Others tell of rumors that the two recognized each other because Gilbert had murdered her brother the year prior, and with a murderous rage, the girl killed her brother's killer, eventually fleeing after the revelation of what she had just done hit her. Local legend claims the restless spirit of Gilbert, the lonely highwayman, still haunts the English countryside every cold Christmas Eve, the day his life was cut short, desperately waiting for the girl and her father to come riding down the road once more, so that he may extract his revenge and finally find his peace. It was said Christ and his saints slept during England's bloodiest and most disruptive civil wars known simply as the Anarchy, during the drawn-out years of 1135 to 1153. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville was a prominent figure during this time. He held the title of the Earl of Essex and fought in many monumental battles to determine the fate of the throne, which at the time was held by King Stephen. But Sir Geoffrey wasn't the sort who fought in the war due to some blind loyalty to the king. He mainly fought for himself. If there was a chance he could extend his political influence and wealth, he took it. As one could imagine, this garnered the man quite a number of enemies, including the king himself when Geoffrey was to switch sides in the war and fight against the throne, believing the decision would lead him further into power. Unfortunately for him, fate would not be so kind to the man who betrayed his king so often. In 1143, he was captured after a bloody siege led by King Stephen himself, which saw the Earl be arrested, losing 2 of his castles and becoming excommunicated by the Pope. From this point on, Sir Geoffrey fully embraced the role of a bandit and rebel, and fought to disrupt royal trade lines and troop routes. It was during one of these ambushes against the king's men that the Earl find he wasn't quite as invincible as he perceived himself to be, and ended up taking a sharpened arrow in the chest a year later. With being excommunicated a year prior, he wasn't eligible for a Christian burial, which was said to have been the cause for his spirit to dwell on the earth for all eternity. The legend claims just before his death, Sir Geoffrey, filled with hatred for those who stole his lands and castles from him, cursed his old properties, stating that they shall never be taken away from him. So it is said he returns as a ghostly specter roaming the grounds of Walden Abbey in Essex, England, a monastery he had founded before his death but was never able to be buried there due to being excommunicated. It is said every 6 years on Christmas Eve, an unnatural fog will roll across the grounds of the old property, and as the moonlight struggles to break through, it will be the only sign of light that can be seen, but only because it will be gleaming off the shining medieval armor of the old Earl of Essex draped in a crimson cloak, who solemnly patrols the stone paths of the abbey with his faithful headless hound. An interesting note to make, if there are any listeners near the abbey today, now is the time to go, because the next time the Earl is said to arrive will be tonight, and it won't be seen again until 2028. Bramshill House in northeast Hampshire is truly one of the UK's strangest destinations if one were in search of the paranormal. The building, as we know it to be today, was constructed during the 1600s and saw many people come and go through its doors. The amount of activity over the centuries has certainly allowed for a great number of ghost stories to come out of the house, but there is one in particular that is exceptionally famous due to its disturbing nature. The story takes place sometime in the 17th century as newlyweds Anne Cope and her husband Hugh watched their audience of attendees converse and celebrate on their behalf. The long-awaited day that Anne had been dreaming of had finally come. And just moments ago, she and her love had said those two fate-sealing words of I do. What made the day even that much more special was that it was Christmas Day. The white twinkling snow fell from the sky with grace and blessed the earth with a winterscape that seemed to make the event just that much more special. As the day lingered on and the celebration began to dwindle down a bit, Anne's new husband suggested perhaps they sneak away to spend some quality time together in the bridal suite, but Anne had one last event planned. She exclaimed that she wanted to play a game of hide-and-seek with her new husband and their guests, and thinking perhaps this could be fun and a little romantic, everyone agreed, and Anne requested a 5-minute head start before the others began searching for her. At the 5-minute mark, the hunt began, and every few minutes a new person would be found. Eventually, everyone was discovered, except for Anne. The determination the girl must have had for the game was amusing to some, but as the hours ticked by and no one could find her, amusement turned to concern. Slowly, the guests began to frantically search the large house for the young bride, tearing it apart while the distraught Hugh was being comforted by his family. After several long hours with not so much of a peep from Anne, rumors began circulating throughout the wedding party that perhaps the girl had secretly fled and had never really wanted to be married. For the next couple days, the family searched for the girl, but no trace of her was found. It was finally decided that she must have just ran away. Of course, Hugh couldn't accept that his bride would just leave him like she had, so for the next few decades, the poor man desperately searched for her, tracking down any lead he could find that possibly could lead him to his lost bride. It wasn't around until 50 years later, when Hugh was nearing the end of his life, would he finally discover what truly happened to his beautiful bride. While cleaning out the attic of Bramshill House, Hugh accidentally uncovered a secret passageway that led to an old room in the very home he had lived in for most of his life. He had no idea it was there, and upon peering inside, he discovered there wasn't very much to look at. A few ancient pieces of furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. However, there was a trunk pushed against the far wall that caught his eye. It piqued his interest a little further, so he approached to investigate. It was clear it hadn't been disturbed in quite some time due to the dust that had settled on it and rust on the hinges. The latch had been shut, but it wasn't locked, so he opened it expecting to find old clothing or relics of the past. But he fell backwards to the ground when he was met with the pungent waft of stale death rushing out of the small casket. Inside rested a despairing sight. A small skeleton was confined in the small space, an old, decomposing wedding dress blanketing the body. Anne Cope, during her attempt to win the game of hide-and-seek, had climbed into this small wooden trunk years ago, only for the latch to fall when she closed its lid, trapping her inside forever. The scratch marks made by her fingernails lined the inside of her makeshift coffin as she desperately once tried to escape. Ever since her body's discovery, it was as if the rush of death that had escaped the trunk when it was opened by her husband had really been her spirit finally breaking free of its tomb. It's said every year leading up to Christmas, the ghostly white figure of a young woman dressed in a wedding gown can be seen wandering the halls and bedrooms of Bramshill House, frightening those who spot her. Over the years, she has garnered the name the Mistletoe Bride, endlessly searching for her husband, who she was supposed to live a full and happy life with. Ruse Hall is an exceptionally beautiful rusted red brick building that contrasts with its green forested surroundings and has more than one spooky story to share with us. Those who visit the front steps of the Tudor Manor claim to see strange apparitions in a number of places around the property. Some of the more famous ones are the ghostly figure of a young pale girl who watches those who approach her home from one of the upstairs windows, and another being a lady dressed all in white, who circles one of the many trees outside in an attempt to summon the devil. But the spectral entity we're focusing on today is the one who rears its head every Christmas night, or perhaps that's a poor choice of words, because it's completely headless. Guests to Rue Hall who find themselves spending Christmas Eve there will often report hearing the clopping of hoofprints on the hard cobblestone driveway outside. But it's not Father Christmas and his sleigh drawn by 8 reindeer. It's rather a blackened, horse-drawn carriage whose driver, as well as the horses, all seemed to lack a head. Nobody really knows who this man is or exactly why he lacks such an essential part of his body, but what is known is that he will steer his headless horses and carriage up the entire length of the driveway, parking at the front steps of the manor. Some then claim a beautiful middle-aged woman will step out of the door of the carriage and march towards the front steps of the manor, then completely disappear once she arrives inside. The identities of these entities are not known, but some witnesses to them have suspected perhaps the driver was once a criminal who had been executed on the grounds long ago. A giant oak tree about 100 feet from the brick building has a fence around it, preventing people from touching or climbing it because it holds a rather disturbing past. Before the tree was even there, right on that spot, a gibbet had been constructed. Now, for those of you who don't know, a gibbet was a wooden pole with one arm that was stretched out to one side, commonly used for hangings, but this one housed a metal cage instead. Local criminals who had been sentenced would be placed in this cage and left to die by either starvation, dehydration, or the cruel hand of the elements. It was a slow, inhumane death that sometimes took over a week to carry out, and eventually people realized this wasn't very efficient if they could only kill one prisoner per week, so instead they planted an oak tree there in the same spot, an oak tree that would see hundreds more die among its branches over the years. It's believed the driver of the headless Christmas carriage was once one of these poor souls whose life had been cut short by hanging, and although he is said to return every Christmas, I would suggest not pursuing a glimpse of it. As legend claims, those who let their eyes linger too long on the headless horses, the driver, or the woman who exits the vehicle, your mind will eventually break and you will descend into madness. Dorothy Walpole, sister to the first Prime Minister of Great Britain, Robert Walpole, was a quiet woman. She respectfully kept to herself strictly to avoid the violent temper of her husband, Charles Townshend. But Dorothy wanted more out of life than to be confined to the overbearing rules made by her husband. She wanted excitement and someone who actually seemed to love her, which is why rumors began to circulate that she had become close with a man by the name of Lord Wharton. Unfortunately, whether or not these rumors were true didn't seem to matter to her husband Charles, who took incredible offense to his wife's actions. And playing off the mindset of, if I can't have her, then no one can, Charles decided to lock poor Dorothy away in one of the many rooms in the family home. He then told everyone she had suddenly passed away in the night, and thus her sad existence would forever be confined to the home. In reality, she eventually did pass away not long after due to smallpox in 1726, but it seems her spirit never truly left Rainham Hall with her body. When I said her existence would forever remain confined there, I wasn't exaggerating. Guests to the house often see her misty figure dressed in a brown satin dress while holding a faint glowing lantern to help guide her way through the dark house, endlessly searching for an exit. Of course, it would seem she never has or ever will. Sightings of her are still reported to this day, meaning after nearly 300 years, this paranormal haunting is still alive and well. But the most famous sightings of Dorothy wouldn't occur in our day and age. Rather, it was the early 1800s when the more famous reports of her came flooding in. It was Christmas of 1835, and a gathering at Rainham Hall, put together by Lucia C. Stone, was in full swing. Notable guests were Colonel Loftus and Colonel Hawkins, who both claimed the party was crashed by the spectral entity of Dorothy, who seemed to descend the grand staircase to inspect what was happening in her home. Perhaps she wanted to join in on the festivities or maybe interact with a few of the guests, but both colonels claimed they were being followed to their room by a translucent figure dressed in a long brown dress at the end of the night. Now, thinking perhaps the alcohol they had been consuming all night during the party may have caused them to imagine such a sight, the two passed out in their respective beds, quickly putting their worries to rest. However, during the day, while the two gentlemen were preparing for the morning, they were visited once more by Dorothy. Only this time she managed to get much closer to them. Both reported she looked like any regular woman, but the one defining feature that forced both of them from their room were the dark, empty eye sockets that filled her glowing face. Another sighting of the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall came the following year by Captain Frederick Marriott. He was a firm believer that anything involving the supernatural was nothing more than just hoaxes and fancy storytelling, so he wanted to stay at the house to prove the story untrue. He also suspected the area was being used by local smugglers, and they were the ones who had actually spread the rumors of the Brown Lady to keep people away. And thanks to his daughter Florence, we gain an understanding of what occurred in Raynham Hall when Frederick spent the night. He took possession of the room in which the portrait of the apparition hung, and in which she had been often seen, and slept each night with a loaded revolver under his pillow. For 2 days, however, he saw nothing, and the third was to be the limit of his stay. On the third night, however, 2 young men, nephews of the baronet, knocked at his door as he was undressing to go to bed and asked him to step over to their room, which was on the other end of the corridor, and give them his opinion on a new gun that had just arrived from London. The corridor was long and dark, for the lights had been extinguished, but as they reached the middle of it, they saw the glimmer of a lamp coming towards them from the other end. "One of the ladies going to visit the nurseries," whispered the young Townsend to my father. I've heard him describe how he watched her approaching nearer and nearer through the chink of the door, until, as she was as close enough for him to distinguish the colors and style of her costume, he recognized the figure as the facsimile of the portrait of the Brown Lady. He had his finger on the trigger of his revolver and was about to demand it to stop and give the reason for its presence there, when the figure halted of its own accord before the door behind which he stood, and holding the lighted lamp she carried to her features, grinned in a malicious and diabolical manner at him. This act so infuriated my father, who was anything but lamb-like in disposition, that he sprang into the corridor with a bound and discharged the revolver right in her face. The figure instantly disappeared, the figure at which for several minutes 3 men had been looking together, and the bullet passed through the outer door of the room to the opposite side of the corridor and lodged in the panel of the inner one. My father never attempted again to interfere with the Brown Lady of Raynham. Our story about the Brown Lady does not stop there with a frightened, triggered-happy man. If we fast forward 100 years to 1936, Country Life magazine had taken a liking to the history of the house and sent one of their photographers, Hubert C. Provand, and his assistant, Indri Shira, to the estate to photograph the inner architecture of the home. They had no interest in covering the supernatural legend that seemed to haunt the place, but while taking a photo of the grand staircase, Shira discovered something off about the photograph. A vapory form of a woman walking the stairs appeared in the dead center of the picture. They had actually captured photographic evidence of the Brown Lady and quickly switched their article to focus on the story of Dorothy. The day after Christmas in 1936, Country Life magazine released the haunting photograph of the Brown Lady to the public, and since its release, it has become widely known as one of the most famous pieces of photographic evidence of the paranormal. I hope you all enjoyed hearing these haunting stories of the paranormal today. Like I said at the beginning, we won't be doing a deep dive into any of these because they are meant to be enjoyed and not picked apart. We're simply going to relax a bit this holiday season. I will, however, let you and your imaginations take the wheel in determining if you believe in such things. But as always, keep in mind all these stories are around for one reason or another. I truly hope you enjoyed this Yule celebration. Sharing ghost stories is a major part of the festivities and has been practiced for centuries, so I'm incredibly grateful you've allowed me to share this wonderful holiday with you all. But with that said, whatever holiday you choose to celebrate this year, I hope it's a fantastic time for you, your family, and your friends. And I truly appreciate you spending time here on the Moonlight Lore podcast with me. For anyone interested in seeing any pictures related to the episode, be sure to check out the podcast Instagram page and give me a follow over there if you don't mind. By doing so, you can also send me a message there and ask any questions or share any of your own traditions or stories with me, or just say hi. Whatever you got, I'm happy to hear it. Since it is the season of giving after all, and you might want to support the podcast, you can do so by donating to the Patreon for as little as $5 a month. It's quite low, and in exchange, you'll gain access to a private archive of bonus episodes that the public doesn't get to hear. Stories like werewolves or wild ape men, weird legends, or chilling true crime. I cover all sorts of topics on there, similar to the main feed I do, so if you enjoyed the stories I shared here today, or any I've done in the past, you'll certainly like the ones I have up on the Patreon. But I know the holiday season can be a stressful and expensive time for some people, so if you can't afford to support the show you love financially at the moment but still want to help out, by leaving a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes or on both, that would greatly help the show grow. The higher the rating, the more people are going to find the show, and it really only takes a second or two to do, but it helps so much. Not everyone does it, but I would appreciate it if you could, but if you already have, thank you so much. Second way to help the show is by sharing it with your friends and family as well. What better time is there to introduce them to the show when you're already spending your time with so many of your loved ones during the holiday? Pick your favorite episode and settle on in and listen to some spooky mysteries with your loved ones. Again, I hope you all have a wonderful time this holiday, practicing whatever celebration that speaks to you. I wish you all the very best, and I will see you next year, I suppose. I guess you won't be hearing from me until after New Year, so I also hope that celebration goes well for you as well. Anyways, I'm out of here, I think. Everyone, you take care, and take care of those around you, and of course, have a happy holiday. I'll see you next time.